So the time has finally come. I'm getting super excited because this motor is going to go into the car today. And it turned out great. I'm really happy with the way that it looks. The only thing that isn't 100% complete is this intake plate. The owner of the car, I gave him another one, so he's cleaned up another one and put his own touch on it. I just had this one painted gray because, well, I needed it to look good for the gram. We have some new AC lines sitting here and a few other little odds and ends which are going to complete the overall look in the engine bay of nice, new, and shiny. And got our AOD transmission sitting here with our flex plate and the torque converter. I'm still deciding if I'm going to bolt everything together and put it all in one shot, or if I'm going to go ahead and get started with the motor first, then I'll get the car up in the air on the hoist and then put the transmission in afterwards. So really excited for this. And you guys are probably wondering, okay, well, what all do I need if I'm going to put a 5-liter motor into a 4-cylinder car? Well, a couple of days of preparation have gone on to make sure that everything has been changed and set up so that we can do this swap successfully. So if you guys remember that rust bucket of a donor car that came, well, the most important part that was on that car was the main harness here, which had this brown connector. Now these connectors vary in different years, so it's really important that you know what year your car is and what year the donor is, because if those connectors don't line up, then you might find yourself repinning connections or just maybe getting frustrated and not being able to make it work. There's a couple differences that happened over the years. You know, your 87 through 89s, everything is pretty much the same with the exception of mass air that was introduced in 89, which would be your connector that would come out of the main harness here. Then in 90, when airbags got introduced, there's a couple other connectors that came into play, and again, a different type of harness. 91, things pretty much stayed the same as in 90, but 92 things changed again, where they moved the fuel pump relay, which used to be underneath the driver's seat, and they put it down underneath the mass air meter here in the strut tower area. So in this case, we managed to get a 91 harness out of the donor car, and this is a 91, so everything was plug and play. The only other harness that you need to get, which I wasn't able to salvage out of the other car, was the alternator harness, but I can actually extend the existing one here, so I'm going to wire that one in myself. So everything has been pretty straightforward. All of those parts that have been taken off have been cleaned and checked over and installed into here. There's things like the vacuum tree that's sitting there next to the windshield washer motor. That guy is different, so I wanted to make sure the 5-liter one was there. We got the map sensor off of a 5.0 car, and that is a crucial part for the readings to go with the mass air meter. And we got our 5-liter coil and the booster. So the brake booster is, again, larger than the 4-cylinder. So yeah, you got to go underneath the dash and you got to get those 4 bolts out and wrestle that thing out. But it's been cleaned, it's painted, it's in there. So I did change the 2 main lines on the master cylinder here, just because on the original booster, the master sat back a little bit further, so coming up forward. You could have bent the original lines that were there, but I rather have the pre-bent lines that came with the 5-liter. Just makes life simpler. Managed to disconnect it and put it on quick without, you know, losing very much brake fluid. You could see that it's even still full in there in the reservoir. Other than that, there's a few other little vacuum lines and sensors and stuff that go behind that passenger side strut tower. I'm going to get those guys installed, but that is pretty much all the preparation in the bay that had to be done. Now inside the car and on some other places, there's a few little things. The throttle cable, that guy had to change because it's actually longer for the 5-liter. So again, had to reach up underneath the dash, and the worst part is getting the little retainer clip back on. But you can get pretty creative in there, and with the help of a friend, you know, pushing on this side, or you can even just go ahead and bolt it in, and then you can push that clip on and everything should be good to go. So the other cable that needs to get changed is this cruise control cable here, and the control unit is sitting in the inner fender well on the driver's side. So when the car's back up in the air, I'll be able to change that out and make sure that the right line is on there so that all the cruise and everything else will remain functional. So that's everything pretty much for the bay here. I might have forgot a few things, but as we're installing everything, I'll be sure to go through it all. And yeah, we're one step closer. All right, so the time is here. The engine bay is ready. The motor is ready. We got the flywheel bolted on. Had to pop off the pilot bearing since there was a manual bolted up to this motor at some point. So all that's out. Torque converter will be able to sit in there nicely. And that's it. Gonna hoist this thing up, get it placed in the car, and then the AOD and everything will get bolted up once the car is up on the lift, just to make life a little bit easier for now instead of trying to maneuver the whole transmission and everything else. Don't want to risk damaging the firewall, the rad support, or anything else like that. So we'll do it this way and then start getting some connections and everything else done. And one step closer to it. It's first fire. Alright, so I got a lot buttoned up in the engine bay here, and honestly, I wouldn't typically go this far with all the little odds and ends in the engine bay until I've at least heard the motor fire. Now, two reasons for that. Number one, I'm extremely optimistic that everything with this motor is going to be okay, just in terms of the way that it looked and how clean it was and everything else. You never know, but fingers crossed, everything's going to be okay with the motor. These things are pretty indestructible at the end of the day. Number two, Dale had the hoist occupied, and with it being occupied, I couldn't get the car up in the air or bolt the transmission in. No transmission means I can't bolt the starter in, which means I can't turn the key to see if it'll fire. So that led me to finishing stuff in here. I put on the new AC lines, wired up a AC harness here, with some connectors that I had off of the old 4-cylinder motor because I was missing that one. So one other thing that I did was I reran the alternator wiring because I didn't have the original 5-liter alternator harness. Now normally it runs from the solenoid area all the way to the passenger side of the motor and then up and around to the alternator connectors down here. The 4-cylinder harness runs to about here because this is where the alternator used to be. So I actually just elongated the wires some, used some proper connectors and some heat shrink, and tucked the wiring down along and around the distributor and right to the alternator here. And I actually kind of like this setup better than the 5-liter. Number one, because the wires are shorter ultimately, which is better for any voltage or amperage that you're running off your charging system. And it just kind of naturally flows off this area underneath that coil cover. Got that all buttoned up, even got that factory coil cover installed here. That was the one that originally came with the car and looks great. It is, however, the 4-cylinder vacuum line diagram on there, but the cover looks the part. So I still haven't done the cable for the cruise control because I need to get into the inner fender of that driver's side fender and get that swapped out. But the main thing now is getting this car up in the air now that the hoist is free, and be able to get that transmission bolted in, take care of our fuel lines, get the starter in there, and see if this guy's gonna fire up. So now we're underneath the car and going through, getting everything ready. First, get our transmission put up. One thing that I'm gonna focus on now is actually removing the old fuel lines that are running up the driver's side of the car here. Take all those off and get them gone, we will be running nylon fuel lines up the passenger side where the normal 5-liter location would be. I do prefer running the nylon lines just because they're super easy to work with and you don't have to worry about corrosion or anything. So they will be more than adequate to fulfill the role of supplying fuel to the 5-liter motor. And other than that, buttoning up a few wiring items here, got our transmission lines run. Should have laid these in here before I dropped the motor in, but no big deal, still managed to fish them through. You can see that the flywheel's already bolted on the back side of the motor here, and got things like our O2 sensor harness and everything all run to the appropriate areas. Our starter wire is run up over here where it needs to be. Did things like bolted on the ground strap that goes to the back side of the cylinder head on the driver's side to the firewall. Odds and ends. So we'll go ahead, get these fuel lines out, and then we'll get our transmission on the tranny jack and get that set up into place.
This should seat.
Voila.
Voila. There you go.
Sweet.
Seated.
Just gotta wipe that a little bit up.
Pump up the jam, pump it up.
Should I try and like fish this at the same time?
You can if you. Where's it gotta go?
To the throttle body, I presume.
Through the back though? Is that where it normally goes?
Yeah. Like it'll be like this, and then it'll go up here and then around.
Over top of the manifold then.
Yeah. So I'll just like point it up to the sky for now. So it's out of the way. Oh yeah, that's making it look good. Okay, almost got some threads. There we go.
Now, put in your bow housing bolts and see if they'll start.
All right.
A couple.
All right, so one thing that I didn't have, guys, was an actual transmission crossmember bracket. And I had a spare one in my parts laying out in the sea can, which I just went and got. And one thing about it, though, is that it's actually from a 5-speed. If you can see where the bolts from the transmission mount are coming out, they're wedged right against the back of the bracket there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grind off these spot welds, and that's going to allow the crossmember to slide where we need it to so that we can get more clearance up in here. Now, that's the only difference between the automatic and the 5-speed cross members, so you can actually use them between each application. Again, you can just grind off those spot welds and make it work. All right, guys, so you can see here that once I managed to grind off those spot welds, it allowed us to move the cross brace from here over here, and now our bolts for the transmission mount are seated, not wedged up against the back here and on an angle. There's lots of room for movement, so we'll be able to do all of our adjustments and get everything tightened up. Now the next step is to move on to the shifter linkage setup. My bad, I didn't even realize that this would be different in the 4-cylinder, and I went out back and looked on Lemon Dropped because this is actually still in that car despite the drivetrain being ripped out. So it looks like I'm gonna have to go and get the setup that's here, because the way that the shifter linkage cable works is different from the 4-cylinder to the 5 liters. Never fails, guys. Whenever I'm having a problem, it's like I need to come out into this winter wonderland and roll around in the snow, so to speak. So I'm having troubles with the shifter linkage. I just can't figure it out, and you know, you guys are probably like, how could you not know how that connects or hooks up? Well, the reality is I've never had an auto car that I've actually worked on or held on to. I've only had auto cars that either got swapped to stick or got stripped. So luckily we got Lemon Drop sitting here, stripped of its automatic transmission. So I'm going to try and get down in that transmission tunnel and see if it can give me a little bit of insight on how this linkage is supposed to go, because there's this bracket and I just can't figure out where it goes. Ugh. Oh, it's different. So the GoPro's upside down, and you can see where the selector rod is for the actual lever on the inside, so you can adjust what gear you're in. And then there's a bracket that's behind that, which that bracket's actually the one that I need. Amazingly enough, the ones that I have are different. So I need to take this out. So I need to get that bracket out from underneath in this car. I think I'm going to be laying on my back down on this gravel trying to get it out, which kind of sucks, but hey, this is, you got to do what you got to do for the projects. So we're closing out another week here at the infamous project, and you can see our project 4 to 8 is up on the hoist here. So I was really hoping that by the end of this week, and for this video most importantly, that I'd be firing this thing up for the first time. I don't know if it's going to happen, so I'm documenting this now as my potential intro video for this episode because I've hit some roadblocks.